craft shows are not for the weak, especially outdoor versions. They are not for the weak. In today's video, I'm going to talk about my experience at my 6th ever craft fair and how it went, some of the things that I'm continuing to learn on my journey, some of the things that happened. We'll have a little bit of a story time. And this was something that happened that was way different than any of the other craft fairs that I've done so far, something I haven't experienced. And I just wanted to give you some tips and tricks that might be able to help you if you were to encounter this certain thing at your particular next event, and something that may be able to help you on your journey into the craft market scene, fair, show, whatever you may be doing in your particular area. I'm here to help. Let's talk about it. So this particular craft show is one that I signed up for months ago. It was one that was going to be highly competitive to get in. It was a juried event, which a juried event means that there's a panel of people that evaluate what you do to see if it fits into the particular aesthetic that they're going for the festival. Because this was actually like a full festival that was going to be a 9-hour event, which is an extremely long day, and the weekend before Mother's Day. So there were a lot of things going on. But this particular event, I know that the first year that they did it, it was a very highly anticipated kind of event. And it was something that a lot of people were talking about in the community. And so I thought, sure, let me try it out. So I applied for it months ago. I actually got in. There were like over 500 different applicants that applied, and they narrowed it down to 100, and I actually got into there. So I was very, very, very proud of that feat. There were other people that I had met at previous markets before this one that said that they applied and they didn't get in. And I was like, wow, why me? Yeah, I was very thankful to be able to join all of the different makers that were in this event. So one of the things that was kind of going against the event in general was the weather. And that is something that you cannot control, the weather, no matter how much you may want to, but things happen, and that is the nature of weather, especially in the southeast of USA, which is where I'm at. So the weather is something you cannot control, and it is something that I actually had a craft fair last weekend, but it was actually going to be an outdoor event as well, and they actually had to bring everybody into their like warehouse area. And basically it went from a 10 by 10 section, which is what everybody paid for, down to whatever spot that they could squeeze us into their warehouse area, which it basically turned into a 4-foot table with like a background. So I had to reduce down everything that I was going to bring into a very small offering. It actually turns out that's the best craft fair that I've had ever. And I was just very, very thankful to have that opportunity, and also that they were able to accommodate us in a way to where we could still have it versus just canceling it. Okay, so they brought us inside because of weather. Fine, great, wonderful, keeping everybody safe. Okay, fast forward to this weekend. Everybody that was going to be in this festival was checking the weather. I mean, religiously. At least I know I was. So the day before, the Friday, I'm looking at the app and it said, oh, that the rain was going to start in the afternoon and go until the evening. Okay, I get it. It's going to happen. It is what it is. So we get to the event, get everything set up, get everything ready to go. So the first probably 3 hours of the event were great. I mean, the foot traffic was wonderful. There were people coming in and out, lots of people coming by, looking at things, conversating, all of the good things. All of the things were happening. And that was great. Everybody was like, yeah, this is going to be an awesome event. So the rain, it did come when it said that it was going to on the forecast. And it started out just kind of like a, like a light kind of drizzle, which is great. just a light drizzle. And I was, looking, thinking to myself, I was like, oh, this is manageable. I mean, this is just a light little whatever. It did not stay that way. Did that for about an hour. Then in the next hour, it got a little heavier. Then it got a little bit heavier. Foot traffic is all the time declining as this happens. It slacked up a little bit. And then it just rained, and it rained, and it rained. Like the foot traffic was pretty much just obsolete. There was nobody coming in. There was one particular neighbor, I would go over to her and we would talk a little bit, and we were just like, what are we doing still out here? We still had, at that point, we still had 5 hours that were left into the festival, allegedly. But the rain was not stopping at all. So, we're just thinking, we're like, what are we doing? What are we doing? So then it just kept getting harder. And it wasn't storming, but the rain and the wind, and it was chilly. All of those things combined were just, craft shows are not for the weak, especially outdoor versions. They are not for the weak. And let me tell you, you have got to have a certain level of oomph to really get in there and do it. So, if you're doing craft fairs and you're doing outdoor ones, mad props to you, because it can absolutely be rough. So we're raining, everything's just getting drenched. Everybody that didn't have sides on their tent were getting blown away. I actually watched a tent. I guess they didn't bring any weights or anything. I did see a tent actually lift off of the ground and end up like about 10 feet away from where it was supposed to be. So that was an adventure to see. But yeah, so it was just things were getting out of hand. So me and the person next to us, we were looking at each other and we were just like, what are we doing? So we went up to the organizer, and as we were walking up to the booth, we could hear the organizer say, I'm calling it at 5 o'clock. And so me and my neighbor, we looked at each other and we were like, okay, because she had come from a longer distance than I had, and she was like, I am literally going to just have to pack up and go. This is one of those events to where if you pack up early, you won't be invited back because you left early. So the organizer said, we're going to end at 5. Let me tell you, the mad dash for everybody to get out of that space was insanity. But it was absolute insanity trying to get out of there. And you've got the torrential rain. Everything's getting soaked. If it's not covered, it's soaked in rain. I mean, it was absolutely wild. When I got home, I was completely soaked from head to toe. All of the gear soaked head to toe. Everything was just covered. We still have stuff that's drying right now because it was just, everything was wet. It was in the forecast. It was expected, but it just went a lot differently than I thought that it would in my head. So what would I do differently next time? What are some things that I would look forward to and that I would try to plan for in the future? And these are things, tips and tricks that you can take into your next outdoor market if you're in an area that might have more inclement weather or something like that. These are some things that I would have you just evaluate, think about before you go into an outdoor market. Number one is having a very good and resilient tent. The one that I'm using is one that is borrowed. I have not taken the leap and purchased one myself, and I'm very thankful to have the option to borrow one. But what I did not realize about this tent was the way that it is, and I don't know if there's just different types of tents, but this one, there are ways that it could leak on the inside with water, and there were like bits of water coming in to the tent in certain spots, And I was not expecting that part at all. I was not expecting for there to be drips on the inside. So that is something to be very aware of if you're going to be doing outdoor markets, is to get a tent that is water resistant or proof or something like that, so that you don't get drips on the inside. Also, another thing, to have the side shields, I believe is the correct terminology, but you can also DIY, making sure that you have something on the sides, a good tent and some tent weights, either sandbags or actual weights. And people have been using cinder blocks that I've noticed. So anything to keep that tent down and weighted, especially if you're doing one on concrete, which is where we were. Another thing to be aware of is that usually you've got your tables, one, two, three, however many tables you have your tables and you have your stuff that you put underneath it. Make sure that it's in something that is waterproof. If you have like a cardboard box or a banker box, or you have something else that might not be as resilient to water, make sure that you are aware that if the weather decides to do its thing, that you've got plastic bins that you can kind of have underneath there to keep everything safe. Another thing that I didn't even think about, it didn't even cross my mind until I had another vendor come over to the booth and ask about it. But if there is a chance of inclement weather or something like that, say that somebody did purchase something from your booth, you might want to think about having plastic bags as an option. I use paper bags. For a while, I really didn't have any bags. But with all of the rain and the inclement weather, all of the paper bags were just disintegrating. So people would come into the booth and they would have these paper bags and they were just like completely soaked. And I actually had a vendor from somewhere else come by the booth and say, "Hey, do you have any plastic bags that I can buy from you? Because everything's getting soaked." And I told her, I was like, all I have is paper. And she was like, "Dang, no, I need plastic." And I was like, I completely understand, but I never would have thought about that until she asked. So just something to think about if you're going to be doing a show and there's a chance of rain to happen. Another thing is just having the rain gear in general. It's funny because I'm 41 years old and I don't really even have a raincoat or a poncho. And I know that that's weird to say or weird to even think about, but like, I'm not really outside when it's raining. I'm not really a huge fan of like just getting wet and just, being out in the rain. I know that that's going to sound so crazy. But yeah, I don't have a raincoat or a poncho. So, rain gear, galoshes, rain boots, another thing to be aware of. Just having the appropriate gear is going to take you far. It's probably obvious for everyone except me. So, just some other like generalized type of tips and tricks for craft fairs is, I'm not sure exactly where the phrase comes from, but the thing about comparison is the thief of joy is something that is completely valid. There's somebody that I've met through craft shows before. I went to her booth whenever they almost closed the show because I hadn't even left. I went and took a lap so I could see, everybody else's stuff. And I went by and, she was talking about how great of a day that she's had. And she was like, I can't imagine if the weather was great and yada, yada, yada. She was just talking about, I sold this and I sold out of this and I sold this. And I did not have that great of a day. I did not have nearly as good of a sales day as I did the week before. And, talking to her, I'm so happy for her. I'm so glad that she was having a great day. But it was one of those things where it made me feel like my stuff was just, and that whole thing, I'm working on it. I'm working on making sure to tell my brain and to keep that going, that my stuff is obviously good enough. And I know it is because I had somebody come to my booth. She was looking at my stuff and she was just like, "You made all of this?" And I told her yes. I was like, me, these two hands, my sewing machine, and a lot of time, I made every single thing in this booth, and she told me, she said that it looked very professional, everything looked top notch. And this is not anybody that I knew, this was just a rando that came into my booth, and she was just like, I am very impressed by everything that's here. You do such detailed and good work, and you've got such an eye for color. You know, if you've got people telling you that you're doing good stuff, then you're probably doing good shit. So keep going, keep at it, keep doing the thing, because I can guarantee you it's better than you think that it is. So making sure that you don't compare yourself to others is something that I'm learning on it, and I'm getting better at it, and it is a process. And one thing with doing craft markets is just some days are just going to naturally be better than others. That's just the nature of the beast. It's one of those things to where, like I said, last week I had such a good week in such a small space. I just did so much better than I did in this space, even though the foot traffic was there. And it's just wild how different it can be. And that's just how it is. When you put yourself out there and you're trying different things, I will say that even though this is my 6th show that I've done, I'm still trying to figure out like what I want to super zone in and focus on. That's another one of the things that I have noticed, is that if you do try to please everybody, you're going to please nobody. And figuring out like the 1 or 2 or 3 things that I want to specialize in is something that I am going to be working on for this next show. I'm actually in the process, if y'all could see the other side of the camera, I'm in the process of organizing and deep cleaning and destashing and just kind of zoning in on exactly what I want to do. If you want to do a large variety of things, feel free. There's nothing wrong with that. I am going to be going through my array of things and figuring out what feels right, zoning in on that, and just honing in on that skill. And like, that's what I'm going to be known for. I'm always going to be known for a lot of color. I mean, that part's not going to go away. But figuring out like, hey, if I want to do patches, I want to do tote bags, and I want to do mini quilts or something like that. Or if I'm going to do reusable Swiffers, reusable paper towels, and something else. That's a strategy that I'm going to try for the next 3 shows that I have. I can report back to you how it goes and see what happens with that. But that's something that I feel like that I want to try, just based off of the best sellers that I've had at my shows. And that is what I wanted to wrap this video up with. I wanted to go over, since I've had 2 shows back to back, last weekend, this weekend, I've kind of had a good idea on like what people are liking. And I wanted to go over what my best sellers were at last week's market versus this week's market. So last week's market, like I said, this was in a different town, in a different city, and it was in a much smaller space than I normally am in. But my main best sellers were my scrunchies. My scrunchies have really kind of popped off. I probably, because I've been making a bunch of them, I'm still working on the best way to display them. I think that I want to try to build a wall, like a scrunchy kind of wall. Last weekend, I actually sold quite a few of these patches that I had. Now, last weekend, I got some feedback from one of the organizers of the event that was talking about that they went somewhere and they had patches like this, that the ones I had before were iron-on. And I didn't even really think about it, that not everybody knows how to sew. So the organizer gave me a little tidbit, and she was like, hey, what about making those iron-on? And I was like, I didn't even think about that. So now they're iron-on patches. I converted all of the sew-on ones to iron-on. And so last week, I actually sold like 4 or 5 of them sew-on versions. This week I converted them to iron-on, and I didn't sell any of them. I got a lot of interest on them, but I didn't sell any of them. So last weekend, patches, good. This weekend, patches. Last weekend, my Scrappy Pals. I've been making these Scrappy Pals. The Scrappy Pals were very popular last weekend, and I did have them displayed a different way than I did this weekend. This weekend, I did not sell any of them. I have an idea of how I'm going to do those. Again, it's so wild how different your display is in one place versus another place, and how that can make such a difference with your sales. That is one of the biggest things that I'm learning. Having it ready and easily shoppable for your customers. So last weekend, scrunchies, sew on patches, Scrappy Pals were popping off. This weekend, the scrunchies, dog bandanas. I have dog bandanas from a show that I did earlier in the year. It was a canine, like, dog themed event. So I did like dog bandanas and tug toys and doggy do bags and things like that. But dog bandanas were actually very popular this weekend. I was very surprised by that. And those were really the main. So those were the best sellers from my back-to-back shows. Some of the things that, like I said, I've learned over doing the back-to-back shows and from continuing to put myself out there, and I'm continuing to grow, continuing to take feedback from my customers, and just trying it, just trying things. You never know unless you try. Anyway, I'm not going to let a bad show get me down. I was definitely down yesterday. I was not feeling like I was adequate in any way. And I was like, what in the world am I doing this for? But I'm not going to let one show get me down. I'm going to continue to get better and improve. And yeah, because that's something that I really want to do. But anyway, do you have any tips and tricks? Anything that you found about doing craft shows that you really want to share and that has worked consistently for you? Leave it in the comments. I would love to hear what you have to say about craft fairs, because again, I'm learning. I'm sure there's a whole slew of people out there that are learning, and I would love to hear your feedback. So drop me a comment if you like to hear about sewing and my crafting journey and possibly random things about me being in my 40s. Then subscribe to this channel, because that's what you're going to get around here. And I do appreciate you watching, and I will see you next time.